My wife, Emily, announced she was signing up for yoga classes, 3 nights a week. She said it was for her mental health, a way to de-stress from our steady, predictable life. I nodded, genuinely happy for her to find something for herself. But as the weeks went on, a subtle shift began. A faint, unfamiliar perfume would cling to her clothes when she came home, something far too floral and sweet for the crisp, clean scent I associated with her. The laundry detergent couldn't quite wash it out. Her underwear seemed to disappear from the hamper at an alarming rate, more than usual for just one person, even with our busy schedules. I started asking small, casual questions. How was yoga tonight? Did you meet anyone interesting? Her answers became quick, polished, almost rehearsed, lacking the usual easy flow of our conversations. It felt like she was reciting lines from a script. One evening, I was taking out the trash and a crumpled receipt caught my eye. It was from a motel, tucked away on the edge of town, a place I'd only ever heard mentioned in hushed tones. The name on the receipt wasn't Emily's. My gut tightened. When I brought it up, she just smiled, a little too brightly, and said it must have been from my brother's last visit. But my brother, David, hadn't been in town for months. He'd been out of state for a conference. That night after she got home, she walked into the bathroom and locked the door. I could hear the shower running, a steady, insistent sound. It wasn't unusual for her to take long showers, but tonight, the locked door felt different. It felt like a barrier. Something in my chest, something solid and secure that I'd always taken for granted, cracked. It was a tiny, almost imperceptible sound, but I felt it deep inside me. A hollow echo where trust used to be. Now, real quick before we move to Chapter 2, make sure to subscribe and hit the notification bell for more stories just like this. Now let's get started. A gnawing feeling wouldn't let me sleep. It was a cold, insistent dread that whispered of things I didn't want to acknowledge. The next Tuesday, Emily once again said she was heading to yoga. Instead of reading, I found myself putting on my jacket, my hands fumbling slightly with the buttons. I didn't know what I expected to find. Perhaps a forgotten gym bag. I don't know. Whatever it wasn't this. I drove behind her, keeping a careful distance. She didn't go to the fancy new yoga studio downtown. Instead, she turned onto a deserted stretch of road and pulled into the gravel lot of the Blue Moon Motel. It was a place that looked like it hadn't been renovated since the 1970s. She parked near the back, partially obscured by a battered dumpster, and went into room 106. The curtains were thick and drawn, offering no glimpse inside. My heart hammered against my ribs. I crept around to the side of the building, trying to stay in the shadows cast by the flickering neon sign. I found a spot near the window, and standing on my tiptoes, I peered through a gap in the heavy fabric. The sight that greeted me stole my breath. Emily was there, her back to me, bent over the edge of the motel bed. I struggled to see the man at first, but then he moved closer. His back was unmistakable. The slight curve of his shoulders, the way he held himself. And that tattoo, a faded anchor on his left bicep, a shared childhood memory etched into his skin. Mason. My best friend since we were scraping our knees on the same sidewalks at age 12. Mason's arm wrapped around her waist. I watched, frozen, as he pressed himself against her. Then, with a sudden, forceful movement, he gripped her tighter and climaxed. Emily's cry was a guttural sound, louder and more desperate than I had ever heard her make in our own bedroom. After the intense moment passed, they disentangled and I heard their laughter. Light, mocking. "He still thinks she's at yoga," Emily said, her voice laced with a thrill I'd never heard. My heart didn't just break, it rotted. For a few days, I tried to convince myself that the motel encounter was an isolated incident, a moment of weakness that wouldn't be repeated. I clung to that hope like a drowning person to driftwood. But secrets, I was learning, have a way of multiplying. They breed in the dark, growing bolder and more insidious. I found myself checking Emily's phone whenever she slept, a habit I never thought I'd develop. It felt like a violation, but the fear in my gut was a much stronger compulsion. What I found wasn't just messages from Mason. There was an entire thread with their neighbor's teenage son, a kid named Kevin who was barely 18. The messages were graphic, filled with explicit pictures and voice notes that made my stomach clench. I scrolled through them, sickened and confused. Kevin acted like he knew her intimately. Then I saw it. A recorded video. Emily was on her knees in what looked like our guest room, her head bowed. Kevin was standing in front of her, laughing as he stroked himself, his movements quick and self-indulgent. When he reached his climax, he let out a grunt and Emily's name, his release splashing across her face. She didn't flinch. She didn't wipe it off. Her response, typed slowly and deliberately, was chilling. "He calls me Daddy." The words echoed in the silent bedroom, a stark testament to a depravity I couldn't comprehend. In that moment, lying beside the woman I had promised to love forever, I realized with a terrifying certainty that I didn't know the person sleeping next to me at all. She was a stranger wearing my wife's face. Instead of confronting her, which felt like the only sane thing any person would do, I chose a different path. I became a silent observer, a ghost in my own home. I tracked her phone religiously, her movements becoming an open book of deceit. I even went as far as to install a hidden camera in her car, a device I felt ashamed to own but compelled to use. The recordings painted a grim picture of our intimacy, or rather, the lack thereof. I listened as she spoke to Mason, her voice softening into terms of endearment I hadn't heard in years. "Baby," she'd whisper into the phone, and then confess to him how sex with me felt dry and forced. These were the words I repeated to myself in the quiet hours, trying to understand how we had arrived at this desolate point. One afternoon, while rummaging through her handbag for something mundane, I found an old photograph tucked into a side pocket. It was Emily and Mason, their arms wrapped around each other, a picture of casual intimacy. The date stamp on the back read 2 months before our anniversary trip last year. A sudden, chilling memory surfaced. That weekend, Emily had claimed she was visiting her sister. She called me, complaining of terrible food poisoning, a pale, weak voice on the other end of the line. The implication sent a shiver down my spine. Had she used her sister's visit as a cover for a rendezvous with Mason? And that food poisoning, was it genuine or a convenient excuse for something else she might have been swallowing? The thought was revolting, but it fit the pattern of her deception. Still, I kept acting normal. I smiled, I asked about her day, I played the part of the oblivious husband. My mind, however, was far from normal. It was a battlefield, calculating, planning. The subtle shifts in Emily's behavior escalated, morphing into outright manipulation. She started turning things around, subtly planting seeds of doubt about my sanity and loyalty. "Why have you been so cold lately?" she'd ask, her eyes wide with feigned innocence. "I just feel like I need some space to grow, to find myself again." It was a cruel irony that her supposed self-discovery was built on the foundation of our relationship's destruction. Then came the accusations. She started claiming I was the one cheating, a complete fabrication. She'd point to my late nights at work, my supposed distant demeanor, twisting every innocent action into evidence of my infidelity. It was exhausting, this constant barrage of blame, this relentless effort to shift the focus from her transgressions to mine. One morning, while I was making coffee, I glanced at her phone on the kitchen counter. A message thread labeled Trent caught my eye. It was from a burner number and the content was disturbing. Emily had been sending messages to herself, creating a false narrative where Trent was seducing her, trying to frame me as the aggressor, someone who was pressuring her. The sheer audacity of it took my breath away. I confronted her with proof, with the receipts of her deceit. She dissolved into tears, her usual performance of remorse kicking in. She begged for forgiveness, weaving a tale of needing attention, of feeling neglected because I had been distant. She even managed to blame my mother, calling her judgmental and intrusive. That night I lay beside her, the space between us feeling like an abyss. I stared at the ceiling, wondering how long a person could maintain such a profound, deeply ingrained lie straight into the soul of another. I couldn't carry the burden of this secret alone anymore. The weight of Emily's betrayal was crushing me, and I knew I needed an ally, someone who wouldn't judge but would understand. I called my brother David. He listened patiently, his voice calm but firm as I poured out the unthinkable details. "Get out now," he advised without hesitation, "before you stop recognizing yourself." He offered me the spare bedroom in his basement, a safe harbor from the storm brewing in my own home. Over the next few weeks, I moved things out of our house meticulously, quietly, under the guise of needing extra storage. It felt like a clandestine operation, but every step was necessary. I opened a new private savings account and transferred our shared assets, the liquid wealth that was rightfully half mine. I consulted a lawyer discreetly, without letting Emily know a thing. I even installed a state-of-the-art security system in our home, a silent guardian she knew nothing about. Every night when she left for her yoga sessions, I would activate the cameras. I watched her go, her figure receding into the darkness, and I recorded every smile she gave to the outside world, every seemingly innocent wave, every moment that was a prelude to her betrayal. It was a bitter ritual, but it fueled my resolve. One evening, I saw her typing a text, her brow furrowed in concentration. When she sent it, I immediately received a notification. The message was to Mason. "If he ever finds out, just tell him you were drunk that night. He'll believe you. He always does." That line, "he always does," struck me with the force of a physical blow. It became horrifyingly clear that Emily's affair with Mason was not just a fleeting physical transgression. It was a deep, emotional entanglement, a merging of their lives that had been happening in the shadows for far too long. They'd exchanged elaborate playlists, filled with songs that spoke of shared feelings and secret desires. They'd adopted pet names, whispered endearments that were meant only for each other. And most painfully, they swapped childhood stories, many of which were stories I had confided in Mason myself over the years, stories he had no right to hear from her. The deception was so pervasive that it bled into our everyday interactions. One Saturday, we were both at our daughter Lily's school bake sale. Emily and Mason were standing together, talking in hushed tones. They were too close, their bodies leaning into each other, a subtle intimacy that screamed of a shared history. Mason threw his head back and laughed, a boisterous sound that felt rehearsed, a performance for anyone who might be watching. It was as if he was practicing his secrets in front of me. Then, Emily reached out, her thumb casually wiping a stray crumb from the corner of Mason's lip. Her thumb lingered for a fraction of a second too long. Lily, our bright, innocent daughter, stood between them, momentarily distracted by a colorful cupcake. I saw it all, a silent tableau of betrayal unfolding before my eyes, and I forced myself to pretend I hadn't. But inside, fires were building. Every smile they exchanged, every shared glance, felt like a silent gunshot, each one chipping away at the last vestiges of my heart. Emily had always been a private person, but she had a habit of leaving her journal unlocked on her nightstand occasionally. It was an old, leather-bound book with faded gold lettering. One restless night, unable to sleep, I found myself drawn to it. I flipped through the pages, my fingers trembling slightly, the faint scent of Emily's perfume rising from the paper. Most of the entries were mundane, notes about her day, observations about friends. But then I found an entry that made my blood run cold. She had written, "Mason makes me feel seen." My husband only knows my body, not my soul. That sentence hit me like a physical blow. My soul? Did I not know her soul? Had I been so blind, so oblivious to the depth of her inner life? The thought was agonizing. I continued reading, my eyes scanning the page with a desperate, morbid curiosity. The next entry was even more shocking. I wish we hadn't waited until after the wedding to start sleeping together. Waited after. The casual mention of physical intimacy before our wedding sent a jolt of icy disbelief through me. Had their relationship, their affair, predated our marriage vows? The implications were staggering, a betrayal that stretched back even further than I had imagined. Then tucked between the pages was a small, smudged section with a distinct imprint. A lipstick kiss mark, bold and red, stared up at me. Beneath it, written in stark, deliberate letters that seemed to jump off the page, were the words, "He finishes so deep inside me, I taste him for hours after." The raw, visceral description, coupled with the implication of this intense physical connection with Mason, sent a wave of nausea through me. I couldn't sleep that night. The words, the kiss, the implication of a shared history far deeper than I knew, replayed in my mind endlessly. I felt a desperate need for understanding, for some form of clarity in the chaos that had consumed my life. I knew Emily's parents well. We'd shared holidays and milestones for years. I decided to visit them to see if they knew anything, if they could offer some insight into the woman I thought I knew but clearly didn't. The moment I walked through their door, I sensed a shift in the atmosphere. Her mother's eyes wouldn't meet mine, darting away, then back, filled with a pained sympathy. Her father, a man of few words, simply nodded when I explained my situation, his voice a low rumble. "You always deserve someone loyal," he said. That sentence, spoken with such quiet finality, confirmed my deepest fears. They knew. They might not have known the sordid details of the motel or the explicit texts with Kevin, but they knew about Mason. They had known for a while. When I pressed her father, he refused to say more, his lips sealed tight. But her mother, her hands trembling slightly, reached into her purse and pulled out a photograph. It was old, dog-eared, and showed my wife and Mason at a dimly lit bar. They were laughing, her legs draped casually across his lap in the corner booth. My mind reeled. I remembered that day with chilling clarity. Emily had told me she was attending her cousin's baby shower. We had even spent that same afternoon online, browsing for nursery decorations and ordering gifts together. The sheer, calculated deception of it all left me breathless. The time for passive observation was over. The time for quiet suffering and simmering resentment had passed. I needed to strike, to expose the rot that had festered beneath the surface of our lives. I chose Mason's birthday as the perfect stage for my revenge, a celebration of his existence, twisted into a public spectacle of his unfaithfulness. I booked the private dining room at a well-regarded Italian restaurant, the kind of place we used to go for special occasions, and sent out invitations to our closest friends, family, and, of course, Emily. The evening began innocently enough. Laughter, toasts, the clinking of glasses. Emily was there, dressed impeccably, wearing the same forced smile she'd perfected. Mason, oblivious, was basking in the attention. Then came the moment I'd meticulously planned. I stood up, cleared my throat, and announced that I had a special surprise for Mason, a memory slideshow. Everyone clapped, expecting nostalgic photos of our childhood. The projector whirred to life, and the first slide displayed a picture of me and Mason as young boys, innocent and full of promise. The mood was light, nostalgic. Then the images changed. The shame-filled motel footage flickered onto the screen. Next, the explicit text messages with Kevin, his crude words appearing in large, bold font. Then, Emily's texts detailing how dull and soft I was compared to Mason. Gasps rippled through the room. Emily's face drained of all color, her eyes wide with terror. Mason dropped his fork with a clatter, the sound amplified in the sudden, heavy silence. I stood before them, a phantom at the feast, and declared, "Happy birthday, traitor." The silence that followed was heavier than gravity, pressing down on every soul in room. But then, something entirely unexpected happened. The moment the words left my mouth, a chaotic ripple went through the room. Emily was the first to react. She bolted from her seat, a sob tearing from her throat, and fled the room, her sister trailing behind her, hysterical. Across the table, Mason's mother, her face a mask of fury and disgust, lunged forward and slapped her son across the face with a force that echoed in the stunned silence. The air crackled with the aftermath of revelation. Outside, the neighbor's teenage son, Kevin, who had somehow managed to sneak into the restaurant, perhaps drawn by the drama or the promise of spectacle, confronted me. He was red-faced and sputtering, his adolescent rage boiling over. He started shouting, pushing me, and for a fleeting moment, I almost welcomed it. I wanted him to hit me, to inflict pain, to create more noise, more chaos. But he faltered, his bravado dissolving under my blank stare, and backed away. My friends, the ones who had remained loyal, simply stared, their faces etched with a mixture of shock and pity. No one offered a word of comfort or condemnation. They were processing, I suppose. Later that night, the fallout continued on social media. Emily, in a move that showcased her chilling detachment, posted a selfie, her eyes subtly shadowed, her lips carefully arranged. The caption read, "I'm finally free. Don't believe the cuts he edited together. Free. Free from me." She had managed to transform the raw, painful truth of her betrayal into a curated performance, a post-apocalyptic narrative where I was the villain and she, the unjustly persecuted victim. The divorce proceedings began, and Emily, true to form, launched into her customary performance of victimhood. She painted me as a deranged, unstable individual, a jealous husband driven mad by paranoia. She claimed I had installed hidden cameras throughout our home, spying on her every move, and used this as her primary defense against the evidence I'd presented. My lawyer, a stoic woman who had seen it all, silently slid an envelope across the table during one of the initial meetings. Inside were consolidated credit card statements, meticulously detailing recent expenditures. There were an embarrassingly high number of hotel visits, categorized under travel expenses. There were gift receipts, expensive ones, clearly intended for Mason. And then there were the Uber rides, all paid for using funds from our joint account. She hadn't even bothered to truly conceal her financial indiscretions, as if expecting me to overlook them in my supposed state of madness. I calmly presented these financial records, cross-referencing them with the text messages and the surveillance footage. Emily's carefully constructed facade began to crumble. Her face, which had been etched with righteous indignation moments before, contorted into a mask of panicked disbelief. Yet even with the irrefutable proof laid bare, she never offered a single honest admission. She simply muttered, more to herself than to anyone else, "You made me do it." The judge, a weary man who had clearly witnessed enough manufactured drama, leaned forward, his voice cutting through the tension. "Enough with the theatrics," he declared, his gaze sweeping over Emily. "This ends now." But I knew with a certainty that chilled me that it wouldn't. Then came the invitation, a simple text message requesting a coffee meeting. "Just want to talk," she wrote, "for closure." The word hung in the air, a hollow promise. Against my better judgment, I agreed. I arrived at the designated cafe, a neutral territory, and found her already waiting. But she wasn't alone. Mason was seated beside her, his usual swagger replaced by a nervous fidgeting. The atmosphere was thick with unspoken tension. Emily, with an unnerving composure, ordered drinks for us all. She poured the coffee as if we were old friends catching up, the intimacy of the gesture jarring against the backdrop of our shared history of betrayal. Then, she delivered her bombshell, her voice casual but laced with a triumphant glint in her eyes. "Just wanted to say," she announced, looking not at me but at the table he proposed, "and I'm pregnant." Her words hung in the air, heavy and suffocating. Mason looked at the ground, his jaw tight, a flicker of something akin to despair crossing his face. In that immediate, unguarded moment, I saw it. He wasn't happy, he was trapped, and so was she. She had used him, manipulated him just as she had manipulated me. I stood up slowly, my coffee untouched. Emily followed me outside, her voice a low whisper, laced with a chilling possessiveness. "You'll never be free of me," she hissed. I didn't respond. I just continued walking, the sound of my footsteps on the pavement the only response she would receive. But as I moved further away, I heard it. Her laughter, a cold, brittle sound shaped like victory, echoing behind me. Months trickled by, each day a slow march away from the wreckage of my marriage. Emily, true to her word, never truly let go. Some nights, her messages would arrive, blurry selfies accompanying professions of enduring love, a desperate attempt to reignite a fire that had long ago been extinguished. Other nights the messages turned venomous, laced with insults and accusations, calling me weak, pathetic. It was a constant, low-level barrage, designed to keep me tethered to her chaos. Then came news that one might expect from her narrative. She lost the baby. Mason, it turned out, wasn't as committed to their fabricated future as she had hoped. He moved out, leaving her with overwhelming debt and the ghost of a life he never truly wanted. In her desperation, she launched a GoFundMe campaign, claiming I was abusing her, that I was trying to silence her truth. Some people, blinded by sympathy or swayed by her sob stories, believed her. But many, I hoped, saw through the performance. I began therapy, a slow and arduous process of rebuilding. Most sessions were spent in a profound silence, the weight of what I had endured too heavy for words. One evening, I pulled our wedding album from a dusty shelf. I sat by the fireplace and watched as the pages, filled with images of a love I now knew was fundamentally fraudulent, curled and blackened, turning to ashes. The gray flakes fell like a mournful snow, but I never touched Emily's journal again. Some pains are too raw, some words still too loud to revisit. I found myself writing a letter. 3 pages long, meticulously detailing the destruction she had wrought, the pieces of myself she had chipped away, the corrosive self-doubt she had instilled. I poured out every lingering resentment, every unanswered question, every shred of pain I still carried. It was a cathartic exercise, a way to articulate the depth of her betrayal and its lasting impact. Yet, when it was finished, folded neatly and placed in my desk drawer, I knew I would never send it. Some betrayals, I realized, didn't require a dramatic confrontation or a final, definitive word. They didn't need closure in the conventional sense. They needed silence. That's all I could offer her in the end, a profound, unyielding silence. But even now, months later, in the quiet solitude of the late night, certain memories still surface with a disquieting clarity. I remember her voice, hushed and breathless in that cheap motel room. The way her whispered name, Mason's name, was punctuated by a soft, involuntary moan. And then the sharp, almost cruel laughter, a sound